It is the morning of December 8th, 1941. Hiroshima Bay. Aboard the battleship Nagato, flagship of the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet. The operations room fills slowly with light. The attack reports have been coming in all night. 8 American battleships hit. Nearly 2,400 men dead. The harbor burning. The Pacific Fleet broken at its moorings. The staff officers aboard the Nagato cannot conceal it. The jubilation moves through the room as each message arrives, each number confirmed, each target accounted for. And yet, one man sits apart. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who designed the attack, who argued for it, who spent the better part of 2 years working out how to make it possible, sits in apparent depression, alone, while the room celebrates around him. Cut to Berlin. December 11th. 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The Kroll Opera House blazes with light against the grey December sky. The hall is draped in Nazi flags. 855 deputies in brown and black uniforms fill the seats. The Japanese delegation occupies the visitors' gallery. The German general staff is present, and their faces are grim. Adolf Hitler walks to the podium. He will speak for 88 minutes. Outside, in temperatures plunging toward -30 degrees, Army Group Center is in full retreat from Moscow. 2 men, an ocean apart. One sat in silence after the greatest tactical success of his Navy's history. The other declared war on the largest economy in the world while his eastern campaign was collapsing in the snow. Both of them, it turns out, knew exactly what they were doing. So, what were they thinking? In December 1941, the war had already been running for more than 2 years. Germany had been fighting since September 1939. Japan had been at war with China since 1937. The Soviet Union was consuming men and material at a rate neither side had anticipated. The United States sat at the edge of all of it, arming Britain, enforcing oil embargoes against Japan, not yet formally in. This matters to both Berlin and Tokyo, and not in the way it might first seem. America is not, in December 1941, a fully mobilized military power. Its army is modest. Its factories have barely been switched on. Both Germany and Japan have done the calculation. Both understand that if America enters the war fully, if that industrial machine is actually brought to bear, the arithmetic changes in a way that neither the Wehrmacht nor the Imperial Japanese Navy can survive. The window, if there is one, is not open indefinitely. Historians Brendan Sims and Charles Lederman have argued that December 11th, not December 7th, was the more important day of that pivotal week. Hitler's declaration of war on the United States, they write, was what created a new global strategic reality and, ultimately, a new world. The question is not what that world looked like. The question is why 2 intelligent men, in possession of the best available information, chose to create it. Isoroku Yamamoto graduated from the Imperial Naval Academy in 1904, and within a year of receiving his commission was standing at the Battle of Tsushima, the engagement in which the Imperial Japanese Navy destroyed the Russian Baltic Fleet. He was 19. A shell splinter took 2 fingers from his left hand. He studied at Harvard University between 1919 and 1921 and was later posted twice to Washington as Japan's naval attaché. Years spent among the Americans, watching the factories, reading the newspapers. He understood the country in ways that few of his colleagues ever did. That understanding terrified him. In the 1930s, as Japan moved toward its alliance with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, Yamamoto spoke out against it repeatedly. He argued that such an alliance would lead to a war with the United States that Japan could not win. The death threats started arriving. Nationalist fanatics had assassinated politicians and military men before. Men who had stood in the way of Japan's expansion. Yamamoto kept speaking. In October 1940, he warned Prime Minister Konoye directly, "To fight the United States is like fighting the whole world." In September 1941, asked to speak candidly about what a war with America would look like, his answer was precise. "For a while, we'll have everything our own way, stretching out in every direction like an octopus spreading its tentacles. But it'll last for a year and a half at the most." Pressed further, could Japan win? He was careful and damning. "If we are ordered to do it, then I can guarantee to put up a tough fight for the first 6 months, but I have absolutely no confidence as to what would happen if it went on for 2 or 3 years. 6 months. He was saying this before the first plane lifted off a carrier deck, and yet Yamamoto is the man who designed the attack. He is the architect of Pearl Harbor. A private letter to Admiral Horitei Kichi is the only document that comes close to explaining the contradiction. "I find my present position extremely odd, obliged to make up my mind to and pursue unswervingly a course that is precisely the opposite of my personal views. Perhaps this, too, is the will of heaven." He had not been able to stop the war. If it was going to happen, and by the autumn of 1941 it was going to happen, then duty demanded he give it the best chance of success he could. He would plan the most effective version of the attack he believed was a blunder. He owed that to the Emperor. He owed it to the men who would fly the planes. On November 26, 1941, the strike force leaves Hitokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands. 6 aircraft carriers, battleships, destroyers, 414 aircraft, strict radio silence across 3,500 miles of North Pacific. The ships do not transmit a single word. The Americans are listening for them and hear nothing. On December 1st, in Tokyo, Prime Minister Tojo, shaved head, round wire spectacles, rigid as a man who expects to be obeyed, addresses the Imperial Council. "It is now clear that Japan's claims cannot be attained through diplomatic means." The Emperor asks for a vote. The cabinet votes unanimously for war. Hirohito agrees. By this point, the strike force has been at sea for 6 days. The decision is made formally on December 1st. The ships had already decided. It is 7:48 in the morning on December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor lies in calm water under a brilliant tropical sky. 75 degrees, a light wind. Approximately 96 ships at anchor, 8 battleships moored along the south side of Ford Island in neat, perfect alignment. The men are at Sunday routines, asleep, at breakfast, heading to chapel. The first sound is a drone from the north. Someone mistakes it for American planes on a training exercise. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, leading the first wave of 183 aircraft, transmits the signal to the fleet behind him. 3 words: "Tora, Tora, Tora." Complete surprise achieved. What follows lasts less than 2 hours. 4 American battleships on the bottom of the harbor. 4 more damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed on the ground. 2,403 people dead. The USS Arizona burns for 2 days. From a purely tactical perspective, it is precisely what Yamamoto designed it to be. From a strategic perspective, 2 things have gone wrong. The first, the carriers are not in harbor. The Enterprise is returning from Wake Island. The Lexington is ferrying aircraft to Midway. The Saratoga is on the west coast. 3 American fleet carriers, afloat and untouched. In December 1941, most naval planners still believe the battleship is the decisive weapon of naval warfare. They are about to discover they are wrong. Japan has just sunk 8 ships that no longer matter and left intact the 3 that do. The second failure is smaller in physical scale and enormous in consequence. The attack was supposed to follow a formal diplomatic notification. Japan's ambassadors in Washington were meant to deliver a message breaking off negotiations before the first bombs fell. The Foreign Ministry's bureaucratic fumbling delays it. The bombs arrive first. Yamamoto understands immediately what this means. The distinction between a military strike and a sneak attack matters to the American public in a way Japan's planners had not fully reckoned with. The moral dimension has been handed to Roosevelt. Aboard the Nagato, the message is slow. The numbers come in, the staff officers celebrate. Yamamoto sits in apparent depression, alone. The man who warned them, who planned it anyway, who knows better than anyone in the room what comes next. A famous quote circulates under Yamamoto's name, that after Pearl Harbor, he said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." It appears in the 1970 film Tora, Tora, Tora. It appears in countless books and speeches. Yamamoto never said it. It exists in no document, and the definitive biography of the Admiral does not contain it. It is a screenwriter's invention. Here is what he actually wrote in a letter to the journalist Ogata Taketora on January 9, 1942. A military man can scarcely pride himself on having smitten a sleeping enemy. It is more a matter of shame, simply, for the one smitten. I would rather you made your appraisal after seeing what the enemy does, since it is certain that, angered and outraged, he will soon launch a determined counterattack. Not exulting, not warning, simply waiting for the thing he already knows is coming. 4,000 miles to the west and 9 hours behind, in a city that is grey and cold and dark, by 4 in the afternoon, the world changes register entirely. In the sprawling Blucher Palace on Pariser Platz, the building that houses the United States Embassy, a 37-year-old Foreign Service officer named George Kennan is burning documents. The telephones have gone dead. The cables have been severed. Instructions from Washington are not arriving. Kennan will later describe those 4 days as a period of excruciating uncertainty. The staff, he recalls, were simply on their own. Here is the fact the men in that embassy do not yet know, and that, even if they had known it, might have seemed impossible to believe. Germany has no legal obligation to do what it is about to do. The Tripartite Pact is a defensive alliance. It commits each signatory to assist the others if they are attacked. Japan was not attacked on December 7th. Japan attacked. The pact's terms do not apply. Adolf Hitler is legally, diplomatically, and by any rational interpretation of the agreement his own government signed, entirely free to stay out of the war. He's been carefully staying out for months, restraining his navy when American destroyers fired on German U-boats, swallowing Lend-Lease and the convoy escorts and the Atlantic Charter rather than trigger a formal break. 10 days before Pearl Harbor, a private meeting in Berlin changed the calculation. On November 28, 1941, Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop met with Hiroshi Oshima, Japan's ambassador to Germany. Tokyo had been pressing for reassurance, a formal commitment that if Japan struck America, Germany would stand with her. Tojo's government feared that without such a commitment, Japan might find itself encircled, fighting both America and Britain while Germany watched. Ribbentrop went further than the pact required. He told Oshima that should Japan become engaged in a war with the United States, Germany would join immediately. There is absolutely no possibility, he said, of Germany entering into a separate peace with the United States under such circumstances. The Führer is determined on that point. Oshima cabled the details back to Tokyo. That cable was intercepted. American signals intelligence decoded it. Washington knew the Axis commitment before Pearl Harbor. The Americans were watching. When the news of Pearl Harbor reaches Hitler at his headquarters in East Prussia, he is excited. He tells the Japanese ambassador, one should strike as hard as possible and not waste time declaring war. Ribbentrop hesitates. Privately, he fears the United States will overwhelm what Germany already cannot afford. He knows what the pact says and what it doesn't. Hitler overrules him. He arrives in Berlin on December 9th. the Reichstag will convene on the 11th. The reasons historians have assembled for Hitler's decision are several, and none of them alone is sufficient. He believed America was already functionally at war with Germany, which was not entirely wrong. He admired Japan's audacity. He needed a propaganda distraction from the catastrophe developing outside Moscow, where the Red Army had launched its counterattack on December 5th, pushing German troops back from the city's outskirts in conditions the Wehrmacht was not equipped to survive. And he had concluded, with the certainty of a man who had stopped listening to contrary advice, that American industrial power had been overstated. In September 1940, he told his generals that American rearmament would not reach its peak before 1945. American war production reached peak capacity by 1943. He was wrong by 2 years. Beneath all of it was something harder to name. A man who believed completely that he was living through an event of civilizational scale that history itself was watching. The prospect of a worldwide war did not frighten Hitler. It confirmed him. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon on December 11th, Hitler addresses 855 Reichstag deputies in the Kroll Opera House. Nazi flags hang from ceiling to floor. The Japanese and Italian delegations sit in the visitors' gallery. The members of the German General Staff are visible in their seats. Their faces are not celebratory. The speech lasts 88 minutes. Hitler recounts the war from its beginnings, the necessity of September 1939, the campaigns of 1940, the preemptive genius of Barbarossa. The second half is an attack on Roosevelt personally, a tool of Jewish financiers, a manufacturer of war, a conspirator against the German people. And then, near the end, the sentence that is the key to everything. I can only be grateful to Providence that it entrusted me with the leadership in this historic struggle which, for the next 500 or 1,000 years, will be described as decisive, not only for the history of Germany, but for the whole of Europe. 500 or 1,000 years. Outside the Opera House, December light has already gone. German soldiers are dying in -30-degree temperatures east of Moscow. They have been retreating for 6 days. Inside, the lights, the flags, the applause, the figure at the podium speaking of 1,000 years. The formal diplomatic machinery had already moved that morning. On the Wilhelmstrasse, Ribbentrop had summoned Leland Morris, the American chargé d'affaires, to his office. A mysterious telephone call. A car dispatched. Morris is ushered in and remains standing. Ribbentrop, in the account reconstructed from George Kennan's memoirs, is striking ferocious attitudes. He had spent 3 days hesitating. Now he performs certainty with fury. Your president has wanted this war, he screams. Now he has it. Morris asks only for permission to cable Washington. His passport is handed over. America's diplomatic mission in Nazi Germany ends. The encounter lasts 3 minutes. In Rome, Mussolini has preempted Hitler by 15 minutes, declaring war from his balcony at the Palazzo Venezia at 2:45 p.m., a crowd of 100,000 below him, a speech of 4 minutes. At the Italian Foreign Ministry, Ciano summons the American chargé at roughly the same hour. He notes in his diary that the man seems to believe he's been called to discuss the arrival of some journalists. Ciano disillusions him immediately. The American listens to the declaration and turns pale. His 3-word response is recorded in the diary. It is very tragic. In Washington, Roosevelt sent a brief note to Congress on the morning of December 11th. Meeting at noon, both houses passed it without dissent. There were some abstentions, no speech that anyone remembers. 3 days earlier, the Senate had voted 82-0 and the House 388-1 to declare war on Japan. A joint session, a speech that entered the language. Germany's declaration was answered with a memo. Roosevelt had carefully omitted Germany from the December 8th declaration, unwilling to be seen as the one expanding the war. Hitler had solved that problem for him freely, without being asked. Yamamoto had said 6 months. The Battle of Midway concluded in June 1942, exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor. 4 Japanese fleet carriers destroyed in a single engagement, Japan's offensive capacity in the Pacific broken permanently. The 3 American carriers that were not in harbor on December 7th found the 4 Japanese carriers that had been. What Japan needed to destroy, it had left afloat. What it feared most, it had preserved intact. Yamamoto's math proved right to the month. He continued commanding the combined fleet. He watched Midway. He watched the perimeter contract. On April 18, 1943, American code breakers decoded his travel itinerary, an inspection tour of forward positions in the Solomon Islands. 16 P-38 Lightning fighters took off from Guadalcanal before dawn, flying low over the water to stay off radar, timing the intercept to the minute. Over Bougainville Island, they found his transport. The man who had studied at Harvard, who had predicted 6 months, who had sat in silence while his staff celebrated, who had written that the attack was more a matter of shame, simply for the one smitten, was killed by the precise capability he had most feared. American intelligence, American precision. He had told friends he expected to die aboard his flagship, the Nagato, in some final engagement. He was wrong only about the location. About everything else, he had been accurate. Klaus Schmeider, the historian who wrote the definitive study of Hitler's strategic decision-making, reached a verdict as close to final as history usually allows. The declaration of war on the United States was, he concluded, without a doubt the one decision which, while being completely avoidable, also irreversibly doomed the Third Reich. Not fate, not the logic of a war pulling him forward, completely avoidable. Hitler had spent months carefully not making it. When Japan handed him the clearest possible free choice, he chose it freely. Both men knew. The records do not require interpretation on this point. It is documented in letters, in speeches, in cables intercepted and decoded, in the accounts of men who stood in the same rooms. Yamamoto knew what would happen and carried it like a stone, planning the best possible version of the disaster he could not prevent. Hitler knew what his generals feared, and waved them aside, certain that history was watching and that its eyes were on him. In the end, both men made the same kind of decision, the kind that history makes possible only once.